Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's work session. We are going to start with transit-oriented development and affordable housing. And I believe Tansy Hayward, Michael Moore, and Ken Bowers are here to discuss this very important issue. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, as they come forward and get the presentation prepared, I want to make a couple of quick comments of introduction to this particular topic. Cities across the country that are in high growth mode and are grappling with the use of transit and the relationship to affordable housing deal with this topic all the time. And what I would say is this is incredibly critical work. It is also hard and really complicated. And so there is a lot embedded in the presentation today. And what I would encourage you to do is think about this really as a multiple step conversation. And we would like to get your feedback in a few spots, but one of the important, valuable opportunities in a work session is for us to have dialogue and seek understanding without feeling like you've got to make firm decisions in each piece. And so it's a lot of content to absorb, and we will be back to talk about this on multiple occasions. So just wanted to kind of frame that up for you a little bit. We're really excited because we have been working on this quite a while with a really strong staff team, and I'll let Tansy Hayward kick us off and talk about that.
Thank you, Ruffin. Mayor and members of the council, again, I'm Tansy Hayward, one of the assistant city managers, and I'm mostly just going to kick off the presentation and then come back and talk with you at the end, although I may jump in at the point if there's some cross-departmental questions or themes that come up as others take on more technical parts of the presentation. In terms of our agenda today, I'm going to start with some very brief background. You had some background materials in your packet that I'm not going to address in detail. We are going to do an update on the bus rapid transit project status and updates. We have more detailed updates for some of the more imminent projects, but we'll be foreshadowing future efforts related to all 4 of the BRT corridor alignments. We are going to give you some foreshadowing of the kinds of things that you might hear through what we're calling the equitable development around transit plan. And so we won't be asking for you to take any action on those things today, but we do want you to get a sense of the kinds of ideas that are going to be introduced to some of the upcoming public dialogues there. And we do want to just spend a little time refreshing the council on some prior direction and discussion that happened around policy options and next steps for the transit overlay district, both revising that tool itself in the UDO and when and how we might want to map that into the community. And so just want to take a pause and make sure that we are working in concert with the policy direction that you have. And then we are going to foreshadow there are going to be some discrete policy actions that are going to be coming before you in the next couple of months. To Ruffin's point, most of the presentation today is just going to be information for future action, although there are a couple places that we are going to ask you for some feedback. So in terms of background, we did get a formal request from the council in 2018 to start thinking more comprehensively about our planning for the Wake Transit Plan implementation. And these were some of the key things that were directed by the council. The item with the check mark is something that's already been accomplished, and those items in yellow are places where you're going to hear more of those themes come out in today's conversation. Again, in the backup in board docs is more of a complete summary of work plan items that the staff team has been working on and their status, but given time today, we're really going to zero in on a few themes that are going to become time sensitive for you in the coming months. And just a reminder, in terms of our internal staff coordinating team, we do have a very active and engaged group of staff that are working together to make sure that we can understand comprehensively the issues and opportunities that come with our transit investments. And you can see on the screen how widespread that participation is. So first I'm going to open this by introducing Mila Vega. Michael Moore is actually here as well, but Mila is a little closer to the work and is going to get you up to date with Bus Rapid Transit, and I will foreshadow that we have some exciting news.
Thank you, Tenzi. My name is Mila Vega, and I'm managing the Wake BRT program. And
Can we
I
just
will-
have the exciting news?
Yes, we can. Well, the exciting news would be slide number 3, I think, but back
Okay, I need to go slower. I get it. All
Back
right,
in
we'll wait.
August, we've submitted a ratings application for the New Bern BRT project. Ratings application determines eligibility for federal funding, and today the notices were published. So the project was rated medium high.
Yes.
So that means it looks like we have a good project in our hands, but that's the exciting news.
It's huge.
We will know about the funding sometime in the summer, fall, so that's the next big, we are eligible, but we're still waiting for the check.
Well, that is more than good news. That is huge news. So thank you for not keeping me in suspense for 3 slides.
You're welcome. Yes, it's very exciting, and honestly, how it's lined up with today's presentation, it's almost like perfect. But let's talk about the overall project and program and the work that's happening and work that you will be seeing in the near future. City of Raleigh was designated a project sponsor for all 4 BRT projects in the Wake County Transit Plan. We started our design work on the first BRT project. First is New Bern back in spring, submitted into the federal pipeline, submitted the ratings application in August, received our news today about medium-high rating. So that is moving smoothly through design. We will be approximately at 30% design by this spring. And assuming we stay on course with federal funding, construction is anticipated in the summer of '21 with revenue service in 2023, end of calendar year, so December. Next big step in the program, we need to initiate route selection for, and we have initiated route selection for the western and southern corridors. So the work has been initiated and they're moving on parallel tracks. So you can see the star that shows we are here. The work has been initiated, and the next big milestone, and you will be making a decision, is to select the preferred route for the western corridor to connect downtown Raleigh to downtown Cary, and southern corridor to connect Raleigh to Garner. So those formal actions would need to be made by the City of Raleigh Council, and in the case of western, town of Cary, in the case of southern, town of Garner. So we are making those, because those are multi-jurisdictional projects. All those elected bodies need to endorse the projects before they move into design in the federal pipeline. And then in the fall of this year, we will be going through the same process for the final northern corridor, initiating that route selection. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the process of that route selection. How do we approach that? And the final goal to implement the entire program is 2027. This slide shows you a snapshot of where we are today. I'll start with the New Bern Avenue corridor, the current status, and you can see the way it's organized. It shows you the current status and upcoming milestones and key decision points. Current status is we are getting close to 30% design. We are reviewing the design plans with City of Raleigh staff. We just had a meeting with NCDOT to make sure that before we advance much further on the project, they have an opportunity to review. NCDOT owns the right-of-way. We are advancing to beyond 30% will be advancing in spring, getting it to final design by summer of '21, and again, target revenue service end of calendar year '23. Southern and western corridor moving on parallel tracks, and they're both currently in the route selection phase. We are anticipating coming back to you sometime in April with recommendations for the preferred routing for both corridors. And then Northern Corridor will be initiating that work in the fall of 2020. So this was my big news slide. I can skip that, the first part of it.
Oh, no, say it again. Say it again.
So we did submit our, to keep Newbern moving through the process, we did submit federal application for small starts ratings. That's a program that Federal Transit Administration has to fund BRT projects. We received our ratings, medium high, great place to be. We also submitted another grant to keep advancing land use and TOD work, transit-oriented development work along Newbern corridor. So there is another grant that's currently pending, and we are waiting to hear about the results sometime this spring. But what it will allow us to do is to continue the equitable development work and to continue applying that work into station area planning. So numerous items that are lining up. Focusing back on the Newbern corridor, this is a snapshot of what 30% currently looks like, 30% design. The easiest way is to look at this corridor in 3 segments, and the pictures at the bottom provide you typical cross sections of what those segments look like. From downtown to approximately Tarboro, it's envisioned that BRT will be running along the right side of the roadway in dedicated lanes. Then it will transition into the BRT lanes in the middle of the roadway, running in the median. And then past Sunnybrook, BRT will be operating in mixed traffic all the way to New Hope. It will still be supported, even though they're in this section, we are not planning for dedicated lanes, but the service will be supported by transit signal priority. There will be BRT branding stations as well. And I need to point out that initially the project did not have any stations programmed between Sunnybrook and New Hope. Through technical work and public engagement, we realized that there are 2 areas of strong transit market, so those stations were added to capture the ridership. And as a result, the current station areas, as you see on the map right now, capture approximately 96% of current Route 15 ridership. So that's just to show how public feedback and the iterative technical process plays out. Another key consideration, extremely important to the public as well, and to the technical team, ADA considerations and universal design. Once we start showing BRT lanes in the median and stations in the median, immediately we received numerous questions about safety and how people would access and cross. So we developed this graphic that shows that you can safely access a median based station from the sidewalk. Somebody who's trying to access a station would press the button, get the green light signal, pedestrian signal to walk across a crosswalk, get to the median, and then use the ADA accessible ramp to walk up to the stations. The stations are raised to offer level boarding, but there will be an ADA accessible ramp to access. And then they can wait, purchase a ticket, hang out, and shouldn't be waiting for much longer because the service is going to be running every 10 minutes during peak hour. So not much time to hang out, but it's still going to be a beautiful station. Speaking about stations, we don't know exactly what they will look like. We started the conversation on the technical level and with the community about amenities. We started to have those discussions, what should be included in the station, what kind of amenities, and how do we need to prioritize them if we have to choose. So we've been going through that exercise. We also will be moving into determining how the pedestrian flow moves to the station, through the station, to again provide for that safe universal access. And when we talk about universal access, we're not only talking about ADA, which is required, it's a federal project, ADA, it's a must. But we're talking about, you might not have an ADA, you might not have necessarily a disability, but somebody, it might be an elderly person, it might be somebody who is very new to the area, just doesn't know which way is downtown. It might be a parent with kids or groceries, so just ease of access and really trying to focus over the next phase on user experience and access for everyone. And then, of course, everyone wants to know what those stations will look like, that vertical component. We will be looking at it, and we will be working with architects over this upcoming year to really design what that canopy looks like, because that's what everyone wants to photograph, right? So now switching gears a little bit towards coordination with other projects along the Newbern corridor. Obviously, we have BRT. But that's not the only project. We also have Newbern Avenue sidewalk project. We had numerous coordination meetings with both technical teams. We also had, let me describe. So obviously BRT goes from downtown Raleigh to New Hope, and in green halo you see the boundaries of the sidewalk project. It goes from Tarboro to Sunnybrook. So we had numerous coordination meetings. We had a meeting with residents along the corridor. We held a meeting on October 16th at the Wake Med facility to discuss various pros and cons of projects moving on separate tracks, pros and cons of consolidating the projects. Unanimously, the residents supported the idea of consolidating the projects, at least the ones that were at the meeting. I'll always like to add that disclaimer, because it does offer coordinated construction schedules, which would mean minimized impacts, construction impacts on the corridor, streamlined designs. Actually, if we are combining them, we can think about how to tighten the design to not have so much impact on the corridor, and also opportunity to revisit assessments. If it's combined, it would become a transit project, and transit projects don't have assessments. So that's something for you to consider, and this is where we would ask for your feedback on how to proceed. Just for your information, Newbern Avenue project has about $140,000 in assessments. The overall Newbern project cost is, BRT project cost is $71.5 million.
I really hope we can combine the two.
So that's the recommendation. You don't have to make the action today, but if that's a positive direction that, and the council feels that that's the way we should be moving towards, we could prepare necessary paperwork to bring back to you at one of your March meetings. And basically, you see that cross section. This is what the project will look like. By combining them, now instead of just having this, where you have the green halo, where you have where you have pedestrian improvements, you'll have this treatment all the way from Blount Street downtown and connecting all the way to Sunnybrook. So continuous multi-use path on one side and a sidewalk on the other side. So there won't be gaps in infrastructure. It still accommodates BRT, general traffic, and parking. And again, we would be happy to work up a resolution and paperwork to bring back to you. So this is where I'm going to pause.
I think that there's consensus among the council to move in that direction,
Thank you.
unless I hear otherwise from somebody. Okay?
Excellent. So we will be switching gears and traveling into the western corridor. It will be connecting downtown Raleigh to downtown Cary. Currently, we have a study going on that has two main components. One looks at transit and helps us determine that preferred route to connect to downtowns. You can see from downtown Raleigh, it travels along Western, but then at John Franklin, it splits into a fork of 3 options. So we are working through those options, and we are coordinating with the town of Cary to make sure that our recommendations match up and line up. We did kick off, and I'm sorry, so there is one component of the study. It's to help us determine that preferred routing. Another component is to look at land use potential and some TOD potential along the corridor within the city of Raleigh. And once we select our preferred alignment, the town of Cary will do similar land use assessment on their side. We kicked off the project in November, had great attendance, in person and online. We kicked off the project, introduced different alignments. We introduced different trade-offs and considerations associated with each alignment. This is just, again, a high-level review. Chatham Street is very challenging to accommodate quality BRT system due to right-of-way issues and barriers to economic development. And similarly, Chapel Hill also has its own issues and constraints with right-of-way and population that would be using traffic, the volumes of populations that would be using transit to travel. So there are high transit supportive populations along Western Boulevard extension, Carytown Boulevard. You see this little asterisk. That always means there's something, associated with this. While it looks like a great opportunity it is a great opportunity to reach transit population, to provide some affordable housing, some economic development opportunities. It would require a new roadway. It has been on the books and on the plans with the city of Raleigh for a while, so we've been preparing for that, but this is just something to think about, and we would have to identify resources for general purpose lanes.
So just to clarify that, I remember from when I was on Go Triangle that those extensions FTA will not pay for, and neither will the Wake Transit Plan. So that would have to come in a local funding model. How are we assessing that right now?
So FTA would not pay for general purpose lanes, so basically lanes for cars. They will pay for BRT lanes, and they will pay for bike path infrastructure. I've mentioned that this extension, it has been a roadway project on the City of Raleigh transportation plans for a long time, and the city has been actively working towards a right-of-way.
Maybe to address this more directly, there's going to be one other place in this presentation that we're going to speak to potential public goods that may be beyond the resources that will be available through FTA
Right.
and the Wake Transit Plan. Frankly, we don't have that solved completely today, and the answer is we'll either need to look to new revenue sources, look to our capital budget, or reprioritize funds that are already available in the last transportation bond. There was some flexible funding in the Wake in our last transportation bond to be able to support some of the investments we were going to be making in transit. But I think as we get deeper into these planning, I think some of the goals and objectives that we might have are going to exceed our flexible resources that were in that bond.
Thank you. And we will be providing more information as we move through design, so we will know exactly what is that commitment that would be required to keep advancing. So this is the schedule for the Western Boulevard Corridor Study. Again, you see the little green asterisks. This is where the locally preferred alternative will be brought. Locally preferred alternative recommendation would be brought back to council for consideration, and the overall study should be complete this summer with, again, subsequent adoption by the council. So now let's switch gears and go to the southern corridor. We are also working our way through defining that route. You can see there are 3 different options leading from downtown, and then just past Tryon, there are 2 more alignment options leading into Garner. So we need to figure out, essentially pick 1 out of the 3 at the top and 1 out of the 2 at the bottom and make them connect. We are working through this process. We have similarly, like we are coordinating with the town of Cary on the western corridor, we are coordinating very closely with the town of Garner on the southern corridor, because that choice and the decision needs to happen on a similar track, with the towns making that selection for their portion earlier, and then the City of Raleigh Council, because City of Raleigh is the project sponsor for the entire project, you would be weighing in on the entire alignment. So as we are working through the southern corridor, there are also considerations, and we have a set of considerations that we're looking at, trying to determine which would be the preferred alignment to recommend to you for consideration. We're looking at traffic volumes, we're looking at how much will it cost to build, how long will it take to build, because depending on which alignment you choose, the timeline is going to be, it could be significantly extended or it could be shorter. So there are various trade-offs, again, economic development opportunities. We are trying to balance that, and as we head into the public, we will be sharing these trade-offs. And again, these are some of the highlights for the alignments. And again, that asterisk comes in at the end, that would require an extension, Wilmington Street extension. So let me show you which alignment it is on the map. So you can see the alignment H. It's the second portion where you have to choose one of the two to connect to Garner. So this is the Wilmington extension that would require additional resources beyond the Wake Transit Plan or Federal Transit Administration to construct. And then other alignments have various trade-offs, either more opportunities for bike path connectivity, or you can have a really good transit project, but maybe less bike path connectivity. So we have to work for all of these options and sort through them to come up with a final recommendation. So this is the schedule for the initial phases, up to 30% design for the southern corridor. We are planning open house in February. We'll have one in the town of Garner and one in the city of Raleigh, again to respect this multi-jurisdictional coordination and allow residents of both municipalities to attend. And we will be coming back to you with a recommendation for the locally preferred alternative sometime in April. And you have another asterisk that again says that design, construction, and time to get the system to revenue service highly depends on the final selected route. That concludes my part of the presentation, and I don't know, Tansy, do you want to say something, or would you like to invite Ken to take us through the equitable? Oh, Jason Harden will take you through equitable development around transit. Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. So I'm the project manager for this project that we're calling Equitable Development Around Transit. And Mila just gave us a great update on where things stand with planning transit. This is thinking about planning housing and land use around the transit investments, which can do so much for the city of Raleigh, but maximizing that benefit depends on thinking about these land use and other issues. That's the heart of this project. And it says preliminary findings, and that's accurate, but I do want to emphasize we're getting pretty close to the final stages of this project and anticipate having some policies and actions back before you in the coming few months. So this is asking two key questions when it comes to planning around transit. One is, to what extent in the future should Raleigh grow around transit? In the past, Raleigh has grown more around driving, and that's shaped the city that we know. The question is, to what extent with this transit investment should we rethink that? And then secondly, and there's a very specific reason it's called, instead of development around transit, that it's called equitable development around transit, is a really important question, is how do we make sure that the benefits of this major community investment are shared equitably, and that residents of all income levels and existing residents along these corridors can benefit from these transit investments. So generally speaking, goals are increasing access to opportunity. And these are the things that this investment can do for our community if we get it right. Allowing more housing choice, reducing carbon emissions and other air pollutants, supporting the transit investment through ridership and usage, permitting more active and healthy lifestyles by allowing more people to live in walkable places near transit. And then finally and importantly, building a policy framework for future station area planning. That would be the next phase of equitable development. After we finalize this phase in the next few months, we're going to switch immediately to doing some planning specifically around stations. And this policy that we're developing is the foundation for those conversations. So we're not coming into that cold and saying, well, what does planning around transit look like? We've already had at a higher level this community conversation about our goals as a whole for planning around transit. So what we've heard so far, and we've had a couple rounds of input. We had a kickoff last summer, and then some pretty intensive hands-on workshops and online engagement in the fall. And we've had a really clear direction from what we've heard from the public so far. So we had put forward 3 different scenarios. How much, again, asking that question, how much should we grow around transit in the future? And 75% chose the biggest, boldest scenario for growing around transit. So a very clear direction. We heard that it's critical to ensure affordability around this BRT investment. 84% said that was important that we take a look at. And people acknowledge the trade-offs. We try to build that into the process. So often, we tend to think about one goal and not how that affects other goals. Preserving things as they are, for instance, versus allowing some change. And so we presented the trade-offs and pros and cons pretty clearly. And what we heard is that a large percentage of people are willing to support more development, taller buildings, if that means providing more affordable housing along the corridors. We also specifically asked about a topic that you weighed in on recently, which is the idea of missing middle housing types. And we heard very clearly that people thought these types were appropriate in walkable areas near bus rapid transit. We also asked about other issues beyond affordability, and that was clearly the number one topic. But the other issues were important as well. And one thing that really stood out was that the ability to walk safely and comfortably to these BRT stations is critical. It's seen as an equity issue as well. If you don't have a safe, comfortable walk, many people won't do it. The people who are already doing it are going to be at higher risk and just don't have the safety and comfort that they deserve. So this is, again, part of that process of developing a foundation for future station area planning. So we've begun to categorize the different station areas into different typologies. And what you see here are 4 of those typologies. One is downtown. Obviously, that's where we have the highest intensity zoning and future land use already. So those would be the several downtown stations that are envisioned. The next 2 are along the corridors, and these are places where there is significant potential opportunity to allow more housing and job opportunity along these corridors. So what we've called the emerging urban centers, those are places, say, along Western Boulevard at Blue Ridge Road, the Kmart site, for a specific example. These would be potentially a strong mix of uses, mid-rise development, potentially to high-rise in the core. Neighborhood center, as hopefully the name conveys, a little bit more neighborhood in feel, smaller in scale, but still opportunities for significant potential housing and other development. So examples here could include Longview Shopping Center at King Charles Road, some other places where the existing conditions are a little bit more residential or smaller scale commercial. And the general uses and scale here, more of a local neighborhood serving mix of uses, moderate density up to mid-rise in the core. And then lastly, stations where there is the potential for some development at some of these stations, but that are largely characterized by institutional uses, WakeMed, for instance, NC State, obviously, where the city has limited, if any, control over what happens in the future, or Dix Park, where clearly there's going to be a park use moving forward. And there may, again, for some of these station areas, there may be on a portion of that station area some opportunity, but it would require some more specific focused conversation through a station area planning process to develop something. So I want to stay here just for a minute and talk a little bit more about uses and scale. This is a little general, and again, the intention is that we're not trying to create zoning here for the station area plans, but create a general shared expectation for what these areas are and what they could look like. What we've put out in the previous rounds of engagement was that the emerging urban centers, that 12 stories or even more for some of these could be appropriate, and for the neighborhood centers, more of a 7-story height. And again, a lot of contextual consideration would be important going forward, but in both cases that there will be transitions from the core of the area down to existing lower scale neighborhood areas. So these are some, again, some concepts that we'll be putting out in front of the public again, actually later this month, and asking again, is this generally right? Is it just right? Is it a little too much, or is it not bold enough? And that will be our final check-in before delivering a final report back to council. So that's the growing around transit part of this project. I also want to talk about the affordability and equity part, because that's just as important as growing around transit. So again, this is preliminary findings and a little bit of a preview of what we intend to put before the public later this month. But we've been thinking hard about ways to ensure affordability along these corridors. And that both looks like finding funding for housing and also ways to leverage the development that we know will occur into providing affordability itself. So a couple of the concepts, one would be a zoning bonus, and that's something, we'll talk a little bit later about the TOD overlay, but that's something that we are envisioning adding to that, which would allow additional height if affordability is provided. So as an example, much of these corridors right now is zoned for 3 stories outside of downtown. If some affordability were provided, that could provide a height bonus of up to 5 stories, which is in line with what we heard people felt like was appropriate along a lot of these portions of the corridors. So that's a way that new development can, as it occurs, ensure some affordability. But we don't see that as the only solution. Some direct investment is going to be important as well, especially prioritizing site acquisition where possible along these corridors. That can use existing funds, plus potentially bond proceeds, plus something that we've called the equity fund. And that would be a new addition to the menu of tools that we have. And that would be the concept of, as new development occurs, that it essentially pays for community benefits and affordability and some other benefits along these corridors. So it would divert a percentage of that new tax revenue back towards equity goals that we've heard are important. Again, affordability, small business assistance, walkability, or art or community programs. And there would be some room for feedback and input about what would be most important to look at going forward. A few more, those are the big ones, but a few more affordability tools that are also really important. And some of these are existing, and the recommendation is likely to double down on what we're doing. The first one is the TODR overlay, and that's something that we talked about briefly as part of an overall suite of missing middle housing strategies. And so, and that's something also that was referred to the Transit and Transportation Committee for more discussion. But the idea of allowing more missing middle types, duplex, triplex, quad, in these areas beyond the core station areas, but still within walking distance of stations. Also looking at, and we heard from the mayor of Durham recently on some actions that they've taken, looking at property tax relief. They've had mixed results with their program, but that means we can learn from what worked and what didn't work from them. We think this is still something absolutely worth exploring. There are many homeowners who tax increases are going to be tough for them along these corridors. Rehabilitation assistance, again, an existing program that we can expand. Anti-predatory purchase. This is something that you hear a lot about. There is definitely a sense that many homeowners in these corridors are being taken advantage of, that they may not know the value of their properties and may not know city programs that can assist with them staying in their houses. So we think there's more that can be done in terms of providing information and working with existing homeowners to make sure that if they want to stay, they have the information and tools that will help them do so. And small business assistance as well, expanding some programs, particularly for businesses along these corridors. So I mentioned safe and comfortable station access as being a core equity goal and a core focus of this. As we are designing the individual stations, there certainly will be a close look at how you access an individual BRT station. This is looking beyond those immediate areas of the BRT stations and thinking, well, if I live within a half mile or a mile, are there sidewalk gaps? Can I get there safely on a bicycle or a scooter? And looking at what's missing and what we need to prioritize to ensure that anybody living near a station can get to one pretty easily. So again, looking to create some policies about our expectations for how you access these areas. No sidewalk gaps, safe, comfortable facilities for people riding a bicycle. And then ultimately, some actions as well for potentially funding some of these interventions. These, again, beyond the exact station area, that would require some local funding on top of the FTA funding for the actual transit facility. So just want to note that. So Ken Bowers will talk a little bit more about the overlay district and some potential changes and options for applying it, but did want to note that in addition to the bonus that I talked about, there are some other recommendations that we think can make that a better tool for ensuring both the form and uses and affordability that we want along these corridors. So looking at frontage requirements, making sure that these have a very pedestrian-friendly frontage along these key streets. Additional prohibited uses that basically are very low activity uses, think self-storage, that we don't necessarily want to see along these corridors. Some opportunities to actually reduce some existing regulations that might be barriers to more growing around transit. So the percentage of required amenity areas or minimum lot sizes. And then there's a pending text change that addresses residential parking in the TOD overlay, but also looking at a broader parking exemption. Again, this is an area where the largest investment in the city's history is being made in transit, so it makes sense to think about how much do we need to incentivize driving and parking in a place where we have these levels of transit and walkability. So next steps for this, I mentioned that it's proceeding pretty quickly, and we anticipate having some deliverables to you pretty soon. We do have a couple of public events coming up. February 27th at the Convention Center in the afternoon, and then Saturday, February 29th at Martin Street Baptist. We'll also have some online engagement during that time frame as well. Anticipate delivering a final report and some comprehensive plan amendments that support some of these policies in general that we've talked about in the spring. The TOD overlay, also the recommendation is to revise and apply that beginning in the spring. And finally, I talked about how this is a framework, a foundation for stationary planning. Well, we anticipate beginning that later on this fall. First along New Bern, that's where we have the certainty about station areas, which we need to have before we can dive into that very fine-grained look at individual BRT stations. But then proceeding, as we know, future corridor alignments and future station locations along the other corridors, proceeding with those over the coming years. So that's what I have, and Ken Bowers is going to talk a little bit more about the TOD overlay options and process.
Hi, Ken Bowers, Planning and Development. I'm going to address the exciting topic of transit overlay zoning. So I'm going to pose 3 policy questions, give you some background on answering those questions, and then get some feedback at the end of this. So, first question is, how do we approach zoning at the stations? Do we wait for people to ask, or do we go and initiate at the city level? And I think for the transit overlay district, the answer to this is pretty clear. If you want a consistent approach, the city's going to have to initiate it, define the boundaries, and take it through the process. There's little incentive for folks to petition for this overlay district, and we would need a cohesive approach to zoning. Second one is, Jason just presented some potential revisions to the transit overlay district, which to date has never been mapped anywhere, so it's a floating zone. Do we want to make those changes before we do any mapping exercises? And then what level of certainty are we expecting before we start going here? Do we want to are we fine when we know the routes? Do we want to make sure that we are totally solid on the station locations, or do we want to take it one step further and do some detailed stationary planning and only then think about initiating the remapping? So the overlay district is one of a suite of tools in the UDO designed to facilitate transit-oriented development. So transit-oriented development has to be dense, it has to be walkable, it has to have a connected street grid, et cetera. A lot of the tools to get TOD are not in the overlay district. They're the base districts, the frontages, the heights that we propose. What the TOD district does is it adds some additional restrictions on top of that, things that would otherwise be permitted that are considered incompatible with the transit-oriented locations, such as drive-throughs or certain types of auto-related uses are not permitted. It lowers parking requirements. I'll get into a little bit more detail. But other than that, it doesn't permit anything that's not permitted in whatever district sits underneath it, nor does it nor does it increase development intensity on its own. Upzoning is necessary in conjunction with the TOD overlay to achieve that goal. So here is a list of disallowed uses. I've highlighted that detached and attached houses are not allowed in the TOD overlay. So in general, you wouldn't map this over a residential district because that would disallow the primary use in that residential district. You would only map it in its current form over a mixed-use district. But car washes, drive-throughs, vehicle sales, outdoor storage, for example, are not permitted in the TOD overlay. Parking standards are reduced in the TOD overlay, pretty similar to what the current parking reductions are within the downtown DX district. For residential, essentially one space per bedroom, one space per unit, with an exemption for the first 16 units. For commercial, one space per 500 square feet for most commercial uses, which is, of course, a lot less than typical suburban parking requirements. And then suburban frontages are not allowed to be combined with the TOD area, so those are the parkway and detached frontages, and it prohibits one-story buildings. So this is a significant restriction. There's a lot of use types, such as gas stations, convenience stores, et cetera, that are typically one story. Not allowed if the TOD is mapped for new construction. You would have to build a minimum of 2 stories. If you're in a 3-story district, then you would have the option of building 2 or 3. If you're in a 5-story district or higher, you would have 2 and above. So this is a short recap of what Jason just covered in terms of equitable development around transit, looking at the option for a height bonus for affordable housing. If this is a thing that the council wants to pursue and the economic analysis suggests that it's a feasible thing to pursue, it works best if we hold the line on the zoning in the area in terms of how much height is allowed, because if you have a 3-story base, then the bonus is worth a lot more than if you have a taller base allocation for height. And partly that's because in that 3 to 5 story range, you're still in the same type of, I think, type 2 wood frame construction. And so the unit cost of producing a taller building are not going to scale super linearly. They're going to be more linear with the increasing height of the building. So once you start breaching that and going into the non-combustible construction, then the economics become a lot murkier. There's suggestions to further reduce parking, create either within the TOD or a companion district that would work over our zones, so wouldn't necessarily disallow the detached residences that are there, but allow additional density. There's some prohibited uses that are not, that we might want to contemplate, such as self-storage, and we might enhance the streetscape and frontage standards. You know, in terms of the timing, as we discussed, if you look at this, New Bern is very advanced, and we're probably close to going into station area plans. All the other corridors were really a little bit iffy on the exactly where the station locations are. In the case of Western Boulevard, we don't even have a completed corridor plan yet. So a little bit speculative in terms of exactly where these station locations are. And of course, for the purposes of drawing zoning lines on the map, you need some level of certitude. So when this is a slide we presented to the council on a couple times in the past, you know, if you move early, you run the risk of risk 1, which is you put a TOD district somewhere where it turns out there's not the station there that you thought it was going to be. There's probably a pretty high probability we might make a mistake in that regard. The impact is moderate, it's correctable, but of course it costs a certain amount of political capital to go back and say, well, we shouldn't have mapped this here, and now we have to do a second zoning action. Also, just from a legal perspective, you know, every rezoning does have to have a good basis, and so we have to have a good reason for putting TOD here and not there. If on the other hand we hold off, there's the risk that stuff will be developed in the interim that would be incompatible with the transit investment. So there's a low to moderate probability that that could happen, but if it happens, the impact is high, because once someone puts the gas station next to the BRT stop, it's probably going to be there for a really long time. And that's a very hard thing to reverse. It's not really reversible. So on the one hand, you've got the risk of doing this early is that you may get it wrong, but that's correctable. The risk of not doing it early is that something adverse development outcome could happen next to the transit, and then you're kind of stuck with it for the foreseeable future. So this kind of sums up what are some of the approaches to timing, and there's kind of like, if you think that second risk is a real imminent risk, that development is happening and is likely to take a more suburban auto-oriented approach, you would go with the red side of this spectrum. Apply now, focusing on areas where we think we have a reasonable idea of where the stations will be, and revise it later if you need to. On the other hand, you don't do it until you really have it nailed down through a station area planning process. And then in the middle is the notion that you would apply it after we've made these changes that are recommended, or whatever changes we decide to make based on the EDAT study, and when we feel pretty firm about the station locations, but not necessarily after there's been a detailed planning process. Here's where the prior council landed on this issue. It was first looked at New Bern, which, as I said, is by far the most advanced in this planning. They decided to defer until any TOD mapping until there were revisions to the ordinance, to the UDO, to enhance the transit overlay district, and the station locations were final. On the Western Boulevard, even though there's some uncertainty, particularly on the western end, as to what the corridor is, there was direction to go ahead and pursue mapping at a couple of stations, or I think 3 stations along the Western Boulevard corridor, even given the uncertainty. So this is the New Bern map that identified areas where TOD zoning might land. The decision was made not to go forward with that until later phases. These are the stations in the western area. They're basically Jones Franklin, Powell Drive, and Blue Ridge Road. And the decision was made to look at going forward with this option. Now, to do this, staff has to draw prospective boundaries, and there probably needs to be some sort of process other than it just showing up at Planning Commission to let the property owners know that this is being considered and happening, since I would guess that the property owners in the vicinity of these areas are probably unaware of the discussion that we're having right now. So I think where we're waiting from based on this is council set a certain direction on New Bern, set a certain direction on Western. Are we still comfortable with that direction? And are there, is this something that we want to potentially accelerate, or do we want to wait until we feel comfortable with where we are with the standards in the transit overlay district and are a little bit more advanced in our station area planning?
So can somebody help me understand what the rationale was for deferring mapping on New Bern, where we're so much further ahead, versus Western Boulevard, where we're not even clear?
So it came out of the transit committee at the time, and New Bern, because it was so far ahead, we hadn't done the equability study at all. We hadn't even started it or had a conversation when New Bern was moving forward. So that was part of the delay to get this development plan back, and then the goal was to go and do New Bern Avenue. But we wanted to make sure we had that study done first before we did New Bern. I think there was
And we didn't care about equity on Western Boulevard?
Well, I think at the time for Western Boulevard, there were some concerns brought up by the council person at the time, and I think the council deferred to that matter on caution of the council person's concern about tear downs that were already occurring on Western Boulevard that have
So in
not
other
occurred.
words, bad incompatible development would occur?
Right. So there were some issues concerning incompatible development occurring along the corridor before things could map out. So that was the reasoning, at least within the committee, that it was brought up, and then it was brought forward to the full body.
Okay.
So, but I believe we're now ready to move forward now that the study is back.
Meaning with New Bern Avenue?
With New Bern Avenue. And also, even sitting here today, if we had done New Bern Avenue prior, we wouldn't have known about the 2 new stops that are being suggested past 440, because I just learned about that with the presentation today. So now that we have those 2 new stops, they have to be part of that full discussion as far as the New Bern Avenue corridor.
So is what you're saying then is the policy feedback that we, instead of deferring mapping, that we move forward with mapping on New Bern Avenue?
Yeah, I mean, the TOD is currently in the transit committee, and I think with it being there, now's the time to move forward with that.
I would agree with that. Does anybody else have a differing opinion or concern? Or
So confirmation.
Question?
Yeah, question. So we do have the stations mapped out, just not designed. Is that what is accurate?
Yeah, so in your earlier presentation, we are approaching 30% design on New Bern. We believe that that should be a pretty good basis for the determination of those stations. Moving those station locations as we move into final design would create pretty significant challenges with the cost and the design process. So we would encourage, once we come to you at the 35% design, that we accept those stations and for the most part, keep those set in place. There could be things that we can't anticipate in final design
Right.
that would impact those to some degree, but we wouldn't anticipate significant changes.
Great, thank you. I'm good.
Okay, so is the policy direction to move forward on the New Bern Avenue TOD overlay?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And this is in your committee, Council Branch, so.
Correct.
We'll look forward to that discussion. And so the next policy question is regarding Western Boulevard. Now, this was just a limited portion of Western Boulevard for the mapping, just those three.
Yes. And just to explain the colors on this map, R4 and R6 are in yellow. In those districts, only detached and attached dwellings are permitted. So if you put the TOD overlay, you'd essentially be taking all the lots because there'd be no development option left for them. In the R10, you can do other types of development, but it's still a little bit problematic because if you don't have sufficient lot size, you also can't do more than a detached or attached dwelling. So the stuff in purple is probably and some of the stuff in red that's not essential is probably some of the targets that we would have here. And there's some big sites here. There's the former Kmart site, and there's a fair amount of land around the reconfigured Western Boulevard, Hillsborough, and Jones Franklin intersection.
Okay, and this is certain, there's certainty that this area will be part of the BRT line. It's the other.
Yeah, so there's
Assets.
no alternatives until you get to Western and Hillsborough Jones Franklin Junction, Asbury Junction as they call it. West of there's three alternatives, but east of there it's all one corridor. So
Okay. Counselor Martin, do you have any feedback on this?
I have a lot of things rummaging around. I think that this is an area of Western Boulevard that I hear a lot about from people throughout the district, both in terms of what needs to go in this area and hopes for development in terms of transit, but also in terms of housing and amenities. And so I think that in terms of this conversation with the TOD, I think that it would make sense to kind of, where did my slide go? I think that there are options along that corridor that I find interesting, to make sure that they develop correctly, and that we are planning ahead to make sure that they meet the needs of the BRT line. So I'm happy to kind of move that conversation forward.
So would it be fair then to direct staff to bring forward their recommendations here?
Yes.
And consider, like some of what you had said earlier, Ken, there are trade-offs. So if you could bring back your best recommendations for us to consider.
Great.
Is that cool with everybody?
we can do that. Is that no? That's not pending in committee, so that would be a report back to the full council.
Yes, please.
I would be very interested in, Ken, you mentioned about coming up with some process to be able to communicate with the neighbors in that area.
Right.
Considering the CACs have been dissolved by this body, I would be very interested in hearing as quickly as possible what that citizen engagement is going to look like.
Actually, I have some suggestions, and I was going to get to that point. So,
As the council member for that district, my job is to meet with the residents and convene them, and I'm happy to do that. So thank you, Ken, but I'm happy to take that on.
So, is this part of the presentation complete? Do we have additional? Okay, I have several questions about this. I have some questions about staffing, and then I asked about the roadway extensions, and then also comments on public outreach. So,
We can certainly take questions now. I just had a couple more slides if you want me just to wrap those up or hold those and for your conversation. Yeah, so here you can just see we've got this for partially for your information and for the public. You saw some of these dates throughout. So these are some of the community engagement activities that are already upcoming that were dispersed somewhat, but this puts them all in one place. And in terms of the city council, we will be coming to you in a more formal setting for you to take specific actions both in March and April. And so just wanted to let you know that you'll see these approvals coming to your council agenda.
okay. Councilor Knight, and then Councilor Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions, and maybe for Ken or Jason, but you're welcome to respond, Tansy, if you like. So the first is about the affordable housing height bonus. And Ken, I think what I understood you to say is the stick-built structures are economical up to around 5 or 7 stories. So, and I saw, and I think I understood that the height bonus we're presently considering or discussing would only be 3 stories tall. So my question then is, do we have options to go to a height bonus that's 5 or 7, and what would that look like?
So I think, and I'll let Jason elaborate because he's a little closer to the study, but the findings were essentially that for outside of downtown were the highest in the very high rent areas. In these corridors where rents are generally lower, you need to stay in the wood frame construction, and that's typically for this type of urban multifamily with an elevator. So the standpoints are like a wood building with surface parking and stairs, and then the next step up is parking decks and elevators that like we're seeing in many locations around town now. You need to stay within that realm, and this would be a codified bonus. So what it means is once the TOD is mapped, if you have 3-story zoning, you have a by right ability to build a 5-story zoning if you provide an affordable housing set aside. And there's another policy question that's addressed in the EDAT report, which is whether the city wants to provide financial incentives to get more units out of that than would be could be underwritten with just the bonus itself. Because in some cases, the bonus will only create a very modest inclusionary set aside, but if the city were willing to contribute some additional financial resources, which we do for affordable housing today, just generally through the low-income housing tax credit program, that could catalyze more. So this would be a codified program available to folks, but its success means that you got to hold the line on the 3-story zoning, so that if people want to build a 5-story building, they have to take the bonus route. So that's what it means. And I think, although it would be possible to maybe look at other locations such as downtown for a bonus program that would address higher heights on most of these corridors, that 3 to 5 range is what's most likely to be economically feasible.
Can I just add something to that? When you have to start building concrete after 5 stories, that's when the cost of construction just soars. So that's not an incentive, and it has not worked anywhere.
Yeah, I think I may have done some lawyer math up here and come to the wrong number. So do I understand it right? It's currently allowed 2. The bonus is 3 for a total of 5?
Yeah, so what we're saying is that currently outside of these centers, a lot of the zoning in these areas today is for a mixed-use district with a 3-story height limit. If you put the bonus in the TOD overlay and mapped it, it would provide the option to go to 4 or 5, but the cost of doing that would be to provide some inclusionary units in the building that you were building. So that would be the trade-off. And you have to design the bonus program so people use it, because in many cases, our public policy objective, which is more people living along the transit line, requires the 4 and 5 story construction. So if you calibrate it with too much housing and people say, well, it's more profitable for me to not provide affordable housing and just build 3, you'll underbuild the transit stations. So that's why it's been a critical question, and we did some economic modeling to try to see what is a reasonable inclusionary percentage that would work with the bonus program such that developers would use it.
Got it. I think that helped clear it up. Thank you. I have one more question, if I may. In think about how we grow around these stations. A lot of the places where we're talking about them being are currently occupied by big traditional shopping centers that have a lot of parking lot between the street and the storefront.
Right.
Do we need specific strategies around these types of traditional shopping centers that might encourage redevelopment across the city, not just on transit lines?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, the main incentive that the code provides today is that shopping center, in terms of the amount of floor area, is way underbuilt versus what the zoning provides. That said, the reality is a lot of folks right now think that it's better to keep the existing building and collect the rent from the tenants on it than it is to redevelop it. And so I think what that's showing us is that the return of the new building has to be way higher than the current condition for someone to take that leap. And there may be other factors regarding to the terms of the lease with those tenants that may be impeding redevelopment. I don't think there's, I think that, but that in general, as a matter of zoning policy, you're going to encourage more redevelopment if you're providing zoning that allows a much greater development yield than the current condition. So more height is one way to do that.
Question?
And just, as a typical rule of thumb, for most urban development projects, the land is about 20% of the project, maybe less, maybe more, give or take several percent. But that means that if the land is an occupied building with rent-paying tenants in it, then that the thing that you're building has to be 4 or 5 times more valuable than that for you to make sense to forego that income stream to build a new thing.
All
So
right.
my question is,
Was it Councilor Cox or Councilor Branch?
Ms. Cox.
Okay.
so the incentive for affordability would end at 5 stories. So above 4 or 5 stories, we would not provide an incentive for affordability.
Not necessarily. We could consider essentially tying it to the number of extra stories you build. It's just an expectation that the most likely benefit from it will come in that 3 to 5 story range. Now, that's an equation that depends on construction costs and what the rent of the market rate units are. So the more valuable the market rate units are, the more it's possible to cross subsidize within the building the inclusionary units. So in very high rent areas, it may become possible to take advantage of that bonus at higher stories. And so it's probably worth providing bonuses for yet more stories. I think at some point we need to work out how many additional stories will be allowed, because the base, there's going to be some desire for some predictability as what the development outcome is given on the location. Right. You don't want to have an infinite amount of bonus in every location, because folks may have decided through a planning process that they don't want to see buildings any taller than 5 in certain areas, whereas in other areas they may be content with 7 or 12. And so I think that we have to be able to, when it comes to taking this as a concept and codifying it, there's some policy work to be done.
Okay, because I don't want to get to the point where everyone's building 7 stories or taller and we end up with no affordable housing.
Right.
Okay.
Actually, just to be clear, what we've envisioned with the overlay would be something that adds on regardless of where the base height is. So it's just that the analysis, and we've got a consultant doing a lot of market analysis to help us understand how to construct an incentive that actually will work and produce what we're looking for. So they found that the biggest impact would be where existing 3 stories are mapped, and that's a pretty big increase up to 5 stories in terms of entitlement without switching to, as has been mentioned, a more expensive construction type. So they found that's the sweet spot where they believe if we created this bonus system, most of those units would be created. But all along we've anticipated creating one that applies if you already have 12 or even 20, provides a bonus there. They found that that's probably less likely to be used, but we don't know that for sure until we try. And an important element that we're planning on including in this is revisiting what's actually happening every so often, every 2 years, and recalibrating what we have. Is it working the way we hope? Is it not producing units? What do we need to adjust? And so building that into this process and managing it on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're continuing to make sure that we get the results that we want.
Yeah, Durham has had a triple density bonus, and nothing has been built under that. Also, anytime I've gone to national conferences, I've asked this question, and they say density bonuses don't work because of what we've outlined with the type of housing, but what they did say works is just what you were talking about. So, who else has a question? Okay, well, I have 2. And probably this is a question for Tansy. When I'm looking at all the work that's going on with the, with the design, but also we're simultaneously planning 2 more BRT lines and potentially a 3rd. Do we have the necessary staff to ensure that this is done? Because I'm just going to say this, you only get one shot with the FTA. And we just got really good news with that medium high, but now we have to perform. So I just want to make sure that we have the staffing and we have a plan for staffing. So
Yeah, I appreciate the question. We can certainly follow up and share with you. Over time, we have requested additional staff funding through the Wake Transit Plan to support additional staff capacity. Actually, some of the staff that you've been exposed to are new to their roles. We've also we're working closely between the transit planning functions in transportation and our building functions in engineering services. We've also added new resources. Engineering services will continue to look at that and be very thoughtful about the handoffs between the transit planning and the more final design, engineering, and construction activities. We will be doing a presentation, I think, pretty soon on upcoming requests into the Wake Transit Plan in terms of the resources that we're going to continue to seek to ensure that we're able to do the work of administrating these projects. So yeah, we're trying to be very attentive to that, and it is possible that over time, as more of these projects come in the pipeline, we'll continue to adjust our resources to make sure that we've got the staff capacity to manage.
Okay. My second question has to do with public outreach. Traditionally, I went to one of the New Bern Avenue corridor studies or events, and I believe probably 20 people showed up. My question is this: I know we've been sending out emails and notifying people through CACs. What are we doing, though, to determine creative outreach strategies? And by that, I mean some of the simple stuff. Like when I managed an outreach program on Fayetteville Street, we put out sandwich boards, and most people told us that's how they heard of the meeting. Can we do that at along the New Bern Avenue corridor? Can we put up sandwich boards at some of the stops at Wake Med? Can we put out something like that at the Raleigh station? Can we put out flyers and hand them out to businesses? Can we do a partnership with the Alamo? Maybe we have, this is crazy, but maybe we have a movie there that shows TOD and other or BRT in other communities. Maybe there's a train movie after that. I don't know. A bus ride. You know, we're telling people, come to, you know, Martin Street. Why aren't we showing them the corridor? Like, come to Martin Street, let's all get on a bus and see what we're talking about. Canvassing, bringing flyers, going door to door. I mean, the most old-fashioned way of doing things, but you know what? It's effective. So what I want to see, you don't have much time between now and February 27th and 29th, I think it is, but I still think there's time to deploy some of these strategies because, you know, emailing people is not the most effective way to do things. And we currently have an outreach staff, you know, that does exist in housing and neighborhoods that can assist, so we're not just siloed. So I want people thinking in a whole new way about the type of outreach that we're doing. So that's my challenge to you.
These are great comments. I'm especially interested in the Alamo movie. That sounds pretty cool.
Hey, let's go to the Alamo. People will come because they'll get to have a beer, you know?
We've been doing postcards. We've been using some of the methods you've mentioned. We have not been doing certain ones that you just gave us, but we have been posting signs at bus shelters, yard signs. We have been handing out flyers at Raleigh Station, taking the flyers to businesses, doing both social media and hard copies.
Right.
We've been advertising to the riders that if they come to the meeting, they can get a free day pass. So we've been trying to canvass a variety of outlets, again, old school and some modern technologies.
Get Wade Med involved.
That's a great suggestion too. And I know Jason has been in contact with some of the public engagement staff of housing neighborhoods. You want to add something?
Yeah, Mila mentioned a few things I wanted to mention. We have tried to reach bus riders directly at Go Raleigh Station and on buses. I think the suggestions you made are good, and we do have some time, and we will, as project manager for equitable development, we'll make sure that we pursue those strategies.
There's also quite a few schools in the area. If we could consider reaching out to principals or PTAs,
Definitely.
especially with our new.
I still like
Youth
the
pass.
Alamo best.
We could holler at
We
AV
just need to
Gates.
highlight the cookies and free bus passes instead of the subject of the discussion.
All right, anybody else? Do you have what you need to address
Yes.
where we need to go?
Yeah, thank you for the policy feedback and direction, and thanks for devoting so much time to this. We know this was a big investment, but did want to make sure you understood where we were going and the status of things, so I appreciate it.
Okay, this was a great presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, next we have the review of the Wake County Housing Affordability and Community Revitalization. Let me see. No, wait a minute. Yeah, that's right. So, Larry, are you going to introduce Lorena and her team?
I'm going to introduce Lorena and let her introduce her team. But again, as we've shared with council several times before.
Larry, could you speak in the microphone?
Again, I'll let Lorena introduce her team. But as we've shared with council before, the city and the county do have a very collaborative working relationship. There are areas, particularly around tax credit projects, where we look at those requests together to maximize the number of units, and issues of working with the homeless and how we allocate some of the federal emergency solutions grant monies that we receive. We have a combined RFP process, which again makes for efficiencies. So again, we try to work in a collaborative manner, but in a way that doesn't duplicate what each other is doing. So with that, I will let Lorena tell you about all the great work they're doing.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having us here today. We're really excited to be here and share some of the great works that we're doing. But I do think it's important that I introduce my team that's here with me today, because these are the heroes that are actually doing the work on the ground. You often hear me talking. I do a lot of talking. I play chess and figure out strategy, but they get the real work done. I know we don't have much time today, but I will take a minute of my time just to introduce my team. So with me today is Ed Barbario. He's the Deputy Housing Director for the Housing Department in Wake County. Diane Salento, who is our Division Director for Permanent Housing and Supportive Services. David Harris, who's our Division Director for Homeless and Prevention Services. Next to him is Vanessa Kopp, who's our Strategic Advisor for Data. And going to the back row is Alicia Arnold, who's our Equitable Housing and Community Development Division Director, and Cicely Childs, who's our Business Officer. And this really is the dream team for us, and the reason why we're able to have gotten so much done and why we're able to dream big going forward as well. So I appreciate them all being here with me today. There is a lot going on right now in housing, as is clearly mentioned in this meeting so far today in Wake County. There's a lot going on just in our Wake County government. So I think it's important that I try to go through this as quickly as possible. I will. And if you know me, you know that speaking quickly is not a problem, but not speaking too much may be. So I'll do my best with this. I'll walk you all through. Just a quick recap on how we got here, and I promise we won't go too deep into this. But in 2016, it was clear to our commissioners that there was an affordable housing issue here, and we need to put some efforts into figuring out what the issue was locally. A 32-member steering committee was convened, and an affordable housing study was done, and that study turned into our affordable housing plan, and that was adopted in October of 2017 by a board of commissioners. What that study found is there were a number of trends that were driving our housing affordability crisis in Wake County. Rapid population growth. We are the second or third fastest growing county in the nation. Second, or depending on the month you pull the information, second or third only to 2 counties in Texas, so we are growing extremely fast here. Our housing incomes are not keeping pace with our escalating housing costs. Since 2008, the cost of rental stock here has increased by at least 35%. Where incomes, even if you take the median income level to include all the high earners that kind of skew it up, it still has only increased by about 16%. So that gap is large and continues to grow here in Wake County. Our housing production compared to growth is an issue right now in the county. You see all the buildings that are being built. We have a ton of stuff that's going up. The issue is that we don't have a significant portion of affordable housing that's being built within there. And as we noted earlier, we can't require that by North Carolina state law. So it's great to hear that the city is thinking of creative ways that we can make that a requirement as a part of development as we go forward, or incentivize it to be. We are losing a lot of affordable housing in Wake County in any given month. In any given year, we can lose between 800 and 1,300 units of affordable housing in Wake County. So we are trying to develop, but as we develop, we still have net losses if we continue to lose the stock that we currently have. And so we're trying to focus on how to preserve stock as well. And there's really just that current unmet and expanding housing need. We don't have enough units to support the folks that we have here. And with our growth, we have to really figure out how to ramp up to support what's coming. Our vacancy rate in Wake County is lower than the national vacancy rate, and the nation has a housing crisis. So that said, we have a major challenge ahead of us. What our study found is there are 3 priority areas that we really need to drill in and focus on. And they are land use, leverage programs, and new public resources. Land use is a really important one and cannot be done by the Wake County alone, right? Because we don't own the majority of the land here in the county. That is the municipalities. And so working on land use policies, we heard about incentive overlays today. That's wonderful. And we have staff that are working with the city of Raleigh very closely on that, as well as the other municipalities as well, to talk about how we can consider our zoning and our land use policies for the development of affordable housing. Same is true for leverage programs and new public resources. These things need to happen in collaboration with our municipalities and our leadership, and we continue to push to do that together in Wake County as well. We have spent about a year building the new department of Housing Affordability and Community Revitalization. It's a very long name, so we lovingly refer to us as just housing. We were a small division under Human Services before this big plan, and we were pulled out of Human Services. A new department was commissioned. I came through the national search for a housing director and spent a good amount of time with our existing staff and building out a team of experts who have really helped us to decide what we should do for the community going forward and how we're going to do it. We now have 3 distinct divisions as a department. The reason why we have multiple divisions and why you see them all kind of spread out here differently is because I think what folks may not realize is we have responsibilities in some way, shape, or form across the spectrum of housing. Everything from the largest men's shelter in North Carolina to the largest program launch for prevention here in Wake County to 300 plus vouchers for permanent supportive housing to multi-million-dollar investment in affordable housing development. We are responsible along the spectrum. And so we have 3 divisions now that help us do that. And you met the 3 division directors just a moment ago. Our equitable housing development, you can think built environment, buildings going up, sidewalks going down. Homeless and Prevention Services is really focused on a pathway home and helping our folks who are really struggling to either find a way to get housed out of the shelters and off the street and or maintain their housing if they need prevention services. Then our permanent housing and supportive services is really focused on intensive services for our familiar faces, or those folks who cycle through the systems in Wake County. This is one of the biggest ways the county has stepped up and really said we're going to put some real focus and staff and capacity to helping to solve that issue here. A big focus of our department going forward now that we are fully staffed is really just strengthening and developing partnerships across the county. You can see municipal leadership there. That's you all here in orange. But it's really beyond just Wake County leadership and city and municipal leadership. There are a ton of other stakeholders who can and should be at the table for this conversation. You know, transportation is having this conversation. Where's philanthropy, the faith community, business community? All of these partners have a stake in this conversation. And so we are spending significant time speaking to our municipal leaders and speaking to all the stakeholders in this and trying to find a way that we can work together to solve this issue that we're all facing. One of the biggest things we've done recently is completely overhaul our tax credit program. This program was wildly successful this year. A big part of why it was so successful, as Larry mentioned, was partnerships. And so this project, this time around for this year, we partnered with the city of Raleigh. And so we were aware of the projects who came to the city. The city was aware of the projects who came to Wake County. We worked together to decide really where's the best use of our resources together and how do we get the most units to Wake County as a whole. That was really successful. We got the most units in Wake County history through the tax credit process this year. Our Equitable Housing Division completely changed the process, underwrit every single loan, and through the process, we are now gap financing $8.1 million in new development for our tax credits. 576 units were designated through that process, and 126 of those units are designated specifically for permanent supportive housing for our familiar faces. So we're very happy with our outcomes of that process and glad to have been working with the city on that. We talked about the loss that we have in Wake County of our affordable housing, so tracking our affordable housing is going to be really important to get ahead of it. You hear about the large-scale displacements when buildings are bought and sold and everyone has to go. And so we want to try to get ahead of some of that loss. And so to that end, one of the things that was built into our study or our plan was a preservation warning system. Essentially, it's a database that is now real and exists thanks to our strategic advisor for data and her team. This database now holds all the legally binding affordable housing in Wake County. If there's a contract on it, we're tracking it. We're tracking it so we can know when is the affordability period going to end. Who owns it? What's their phone number? How can I get ahead of this loss? Can I call them before it goes up for grabs to the bigger market and say, hey, we're Wake County, we've got some money, you may not have done renovations in a while, we can help you with that. And for that, we need 30 more years of affordable housing. Right? But if they go out to a bank to get a loan, likely they won't be able to create a building that is affordable going forward because the cost of that loan then will be off onto the renters. And so our goal is to get ahead of that loss. This is the first bar graph that we got out of the system. It was a little scary, but at least we know what's coming. What it told us is in about 5-6 years, we could lose upwards of 1,000 units of just our legally binding affordable housing in that 1 year, and we lose far more naturally occurring than legally binding. So while that is scary, the good news is we know about it, right? And so we can plan to ramp up to do something about it. And so we're working on that now. Phase 2 of this will be to track the naturally occurring affordable housing. Really difficult because there's no contracts to pull, but there is a way to get ahead of it, and we're working very hard to figure that out as well. Another initiative that we're working really diligently on is our proposed acquisition and preservation funds. Right now, if you would like funding through our department, every single real estate transaction must go before the Board of Commissioners. And it takes time to get in front of them. If you bring us a perfect project, it can take 6 to 8 weeks for us to get you on the agenda and get it approved. By then, that plot of land or that building is gone to the bigger market. And so we know that we both must move quicker, and we also must have a better way to leverage our dollars further. And so the acquisition and preservation funds are ways that we can do that. Essentially, it's a separate arm of the department where we can leverage dollars further, and if you need a loan, as long as you meet the needs of all the stakeholders that are a part of this project, you can come and get a loan like you would a regular bank and move as quickly as the bigger market. And so we can keep these plots of land or these preservation opportunities within the affordable housing arena. Wake Prevent is also something that we've recently launched. As of October 1, we launched Wake County's answer to homelessness prevention in the county. If you do not meet HUD's definition of literally homeless, you may not access federal funds to get rehoused. So essentially, you have to become street homeless before you can access money to get yourself properly housed. We don't believe that's the appropriate thing to do. It's not the right thing to do, and we need to find a way to step up. We had a ton of folks who are living in our hotels, that are couch surfing. You all know the story. And so we had to figure out a way to support. We launched Wake Prevent on October 1st, and now if you are fleeing domestic violence, if you are couch surfing, if you are currently facing eviction, if you are living in a hotel that you're paying for or exiting institution, you now can be referred to Wake Prevent. It is a county-wide program, and for all households, as long as you are 50% or below of the income, area median income, and 30 days or less to homelessness, you likely can be served by our program. This program has been met with significant need. We have had upwards of, well, on average, 100 properly vetted referrals each month to this program, meaning they have been vetted, they qualify. We have a team of 7 right now in Wake County, of which there are 4 social workers trying to work with all these folks. This program, though, with all that, has done a really great job and has so far, since October 1, housed 91 folks and or helped them to remain stably housed, and has expended upwards of $170,000 in direct assistance straight to our residents here in Wake County. And so we're very happy at that outcome. We do know that we need to ramp up. A part of our budget request for next year is to double the size of the staff for this program. And as far as direct assistance is concerned, we're working with municipalities as well as the faith community to talk about ways that we can pool our resources and have more dollars available for folks as we ramp the staff up to work with them. So we're very happy about that program and the outcomes. We are also focused on ending veterans homelessness in Wake County. A few years ago, we signed up to effectively end veterans homelessness by 2021. To do that, it's a large-scale community effort. We work with community groups, service agencies, a ton of partners that work in our community, the Raleigh Wake Partnership to Prevent End Homelessness, and Veterans Fairs, and it does look like we are going to be able to meet this by 2021. So we're super excited to see, that the progress towards ending veterans homelessness. As the daughter of a vet, it's really important to me as well. So we're excited about that. Oak City Cares is a wonderful multi-service agency that was launched a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, as a matter of fact. This too was in partnership with the city, Wake County, Catholic Charities, and the Partnership to Prevent and End Homelessness. Essentially, it is a space where if you need services, you can go there and get connected to the services. You can't get everything there, but they can help provide the warm handoff for what you need, and we are intricately involved in this process along the way and have a ton of staff that are there working with them. It's also on the same campus as our men's shelter, and so we're always involved in the conversation on how we can better the campus space as well. Cornerstone was sort of like Oak City Cares before there was Oak City Cares, except for Oak City Cares is like on steroids and way cooler, so we like it, we love it. But Cornerstone was a resource for the community prior to Oak City Cares, and so it provided showers, some connection to case management. It's seen a decrease in foot traffic since Oak City Cares has opened, and we expected that. What we wanted to do, though, was watch and see who needed the Cornerstone space still, who was coming back. And what we saw is pretty much what we expected. It was those folks who really just couldn't function in a space as busy as an Oak City Cares. They typically have higher needs or behavioral health issues and are just really struggling. And so they were coming back to what they knew at Cornerstone. So we said, well, this building should be what the community needs. And so what we're proposing for next year is that Cornerstone is reimagined to be the forward face for permanent supportive housing in Wake County. We are proposing to have our licensed clinical social workers, housing navigators, peer support for those folks who are cycling through the systems to really wrap our arms around them and help them to stabilize. We also have 18 units that we own upstairs with the building, and we are proposing to turn them into bridge housing while folks get stabilized before they then transition onto a voucher and out into the broader community. South Wilmington Street Center that we spoke about is a large men's shelter that we have. It has been around for a long time, and they have done the best they could with the resources they've had. It has been, in my opinion, underfunded for some time. It lost funding in the economic downturn and never regained what it had. And we believe that this shelter should be a best practice low barrier shelter model, and it should ensure that the gentlemen who are leaving there are stabilized once they do. So we are proposing in our new budget to increase the level of staff and case management there, and have already begun the process of helping staff understand what it means to run a true low barrier best practice shelter. And so we're very excited about that as well. One of the other big things that we're focused on going forward right now for 2021 is the funding of a housing services referral line. We are aware that coordinated entry is incredibly difficult to get through right now. It is not for lack of trying. All of the access sites are working incredibly hard, but they are overwhelmed right now with the need, and they are underfunded for what they're doing. Understanding that and knowing that Wake Prevent goes through coordinated entry currently, which put a lot of pressure on the system with all the folks who are coming. We just told you it was 100 vetted referrals. There was many more that come to the access sites to get to us. So we're proposing that Wake County then will issue an RFP to fund a housing services referral line. Essentially, this will be a phone line that if any of us have a person who is struggling for housing, we can give them one phone number to call. As opposed to saying, call one of the access sites, show up, we can give them one number and have properly trained staff that then can say, all right, based off of what you said, I think you fit for diversion, let me provide a handoff over there. Or based on what you said, you may meet the criteria for Wake Prevent or prevention program, let me get you there. Or, if need be, based on what you said, you meet the literal homelessness criteria and you need to go to shelter, let me get you to coordinated entry. So we're talking about elevating above just coordinated entry and creating a space where we can take the pressure off the access sites. So those who really do need it and are of the greatest need can actually get to shelter. So those are the big things. I don't know if I made it in 10 minutes, but I tried. Those are the large things that we're focused on right now. There are many other small details, but for this purposes of this meeting, we just gave you a condensed version. Happy to take any questions.
Lorena, thank you so much for being here. It's hard to believe that you've been in existence for just a little over a year with all that you've accomplished. And thanks for coming and sharing with us what you're working on today to help us develop that understanding based on what we're working on. Councilor Stewart had requested that you be here and give us an update, so really appreciate it. One of the things I wanted to comment on was just the referral line. You're absolutely right, that is so necessary. So I'm really glad to see that that's on the list of really important things to do, as there are many other things as well. Absolutely. Does anybody have any specific questions?
Two.
Councilor Melton first, then Councilor Branch, and then Councilor Stewart.
Thank you for being here and for all the work you and your team are doing. This is really important work, and I think it's going to take a lot of collaboration for us to address these issues. My question is about the Wake Prevent program.
Sure.
What are your referral sources right now? Where are you seeing people come to that program from?
Yeah, so we only take referrals through coordinated entry, and that's why I mentioned that we know it was already really difficult, and with Wake Prevent, with the large volume, they are really overwhelmed right now. So coordinated entry means that you can come through any one of our 8 access sites that are already existing in Wake County. They are not Wake County access sites. They are led by or pulled together by the Partnership to Prevent and End Homelessness, because they are our federally identified collaborative applicant for the federal funds that come in for the literal homeless population. It's a lot to say that we partner with another entity to ensure that we are not creating a separate entry into services and instead are partnering with how folks are entering into services currently in our community.
One part that piqued my interest, I practice domestic law, and so I do a lot of domestic violence work, and I volunteer down in domestic violence courtroom in Wake County often, and there are a lot of folks who feel like they cannot leave their situation because they have no place to go.
Absolutely.
So is there a coordination with Interact or Legal Aid of North Carolina, or even just the domestic violence office in Wake County for this program?
There is, and we actually have staff that sit at Interact 2 days a week to ensure that the women and men who are coming there have direct access to us. When they want to schedule an appointment, they can come there if that's where they feel safe. The reason why that was really important to this program is, one, HUD does have a focus on them as a part of their 4 categories of homelessness. They just fund only category 1, so domestic violence doesn't fit in there. But we know that one of the best ways, or one of the most common ways to control someone is through their finances, right? And so if you can't access dollars, you're stuck and can't get out. And so we wanted to remove that barrier. If folks are currently fleeing and it's just finances and some support, we want to be there to provide the support, and we partner with Interact for that as well.
Thank you very much. And I also talk incredibly fast as well, so I appreciate that.
Well, good. Well, I'm at home then.
All right. Thank you again. It's good seeing you again. As far as Wake Prevent, what's the percentage of repeat residents are you all seeing? Are you tracking that someone you help, but for some reason something happens and you're going through the cycle again?
Yeah, we've just launched October 1, so that has not yet been an issue, and our hope is that it won't, but realistically, at some point, some folks may come back. But this is why we don't do a one-size-fits-all approach to services. We don't just do security deposit and first month's rent, or just do 3 months, because it really needs to be individualized for your specific need. So if you come to us and we evaluate you, and we know because you've lost a job but are already working again, all you need is 1 month, and that's what we'll do. But if we learn that we need mean, to help you get connected with a job or help you with some training, then you can do multiple months and maybe we step you down off of support. So our goal is that once we leave, they're stabilized, and every single person gets a housing stabilization plan that lasts for 3 months at a time, and then we recertify after that if need be. We've just started, so.
Perfect. And the other question is, as far as your legally binding affordable housing, I see active and inconclusive. The inconclusive, are those the ones you haven't fully verified yet, or?
They're the ones that we can't necessarily count them out, so we have to keep our eye on them.
Okay, okay. And first of all, the other thing is, whatever the city, I think you and Larry meet often and have a lot of conversations. And I'm pretty sure in the budgeting process, Larry will have recommendations in which the city and the county can further work together.
That's great. And we actually already do in a number of ways. We have spent, I'm sure this partnership was here long before I was here, but I'll speak for my time here. I've enjoyed a really great relationship with the city. Larry and his team and I have we meet every month and wherever else as needed. And there are a number of things that we're working on. So we mentioned, Oak City Cares, that was a partnership. We mentioned the tax credit process. That's a partnership. Even the South Wilmington Street Center, the city pays for some operating costs there. So those are all partnerships. Even so far as to launching Wake Prevent, even though it's a county program, early on in the process, we talked about who's going to use what out of our ESG combined application pod, and the city focused more on rapid rehousing, and we did prevention, so that we were really finding folks to take the lead on big efforts, but not leaving each other siloed, still working together going forward. So it's a great relationship.
Perfect.
Thank you. Councilor Stewart.
Thank you. Thank your team so much for being here as well and hanging with us. One of the things I'm really interested in is the data you're producing, and wondering if we might be able to get some information probably back to our housing team on what Raleigh's biggest need is per the data that y'all have been gathering over the past few months.
Absolutely. So Vanessa's data is always a hit. And so actually, yes, and we've already started that process. Awesome. So over the last month and a half, myself, my deputy housing director, and the deputy county director, Derek Page, we have all been going out and doing a tour. We are meeting with every single municipal leader, town manager within the county. I think we only have 2 left. And each time we're bringing data information sheets that are specific to that municipality. We know that you've heard 56,000 unit deficit for 3 years, but what does that mean for Raleigh? What does that mean for Cary? What does that mean for Holly Springs? And so we're starting that process now. From there, a lot of good conversations have come out that have said, okay, well, this is good data. We brought basic data points, but now we want to know more about X. And so the second step then is to look at those specific things that municipalities are interested in, and to go beyond just a number on a piece of paper, but to really help analyze what does that mean for your community. And just since I mentioned that 56,000 number, as of December, it's actually 60,775 now as a deficit in Wake County. So.
That's sobering.
Well, but it's doable. If we work together, we can get it done.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I just really want to appreciate the relationship that we have with y'all, and want us to, as a board, think about how is it that we're going to use our dollars to not duplicate, but work really strategically together as we move forward this year. So, all right. Thank you.
Well, we're happy to continue partnering and working. It's been a great relationship. We look forward to many more great projects going forward. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Lorena, for being here. Don't be a stranger.
No,
thank
ma'am.
you. Thank you to your team.
All right.
Okay, we have more on affordable housing. This time, a report from Larry Jarvis on the Affordable Housing Bond Advisory Committee that we asked you to create. And just to clarify. Yes, and just to clarify, this is the board that will advise and work with the team to come up with the ways the affordable housing or housing affordability bond will be spent. So what will go on the ballot?
Thank you. So what we are passing out is a proposed housing bond advisory committee consisting of 20 members that would be led by 2 co-chairs that have agreed to serve, and those are Yvette Holmes with DHIC, and Paul Kane is still here after all that time with the Home Builders Association of Raleigh-Wake County. So we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow with the co-chairs. Basically, it's a planning session to kind of look at how we want to structure the engagement with the broader committee and other groups, because we do want this effort to be facilitated and led by the co-chairs. Staff will be there to provide information and support, but we want the effort to be led by this committee and not be perceived as a staff-led effort.
Larry, this is an outstanding list. It's very diverse, not only among people, but in terms of agencies and different associations. Well done.
Well, a lot of the people on here are folks that reached out to us and said, I know that this is going to happen. I'd be interested in serving. So that kind of helped make our job a little bit easier when we knew that people were already, familiar with the subject and wanted to be a part of it. So it made our job easier.
Definitely. Thank you. Do we need a perfect?
No, as you recall, your guidance was to have the staff go out and do it, but we thought we'd share with you anyway.
Yes,
Thank you.
we appreciate that. Job well done and quickly. I like that.
Don't always do things quickly.
Be careful how you answer that.
And I see some of the folks on this list in the room, so thank you very much for your willingness to serve, and we very much appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely
Yes.
both of our co-chairs, Ms. Holmes and Mr.
Yes.
Kane. Thank you both for volunteering.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. Okay. That was quick. Thank you on that too, Larry. The fourth thing is the Wake County Hospitality Tax Update.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Allison Bradsher, CFO here in the Finance Department. I know in the interest of time, I will do my best to talk fast. Here's the agenda for today. I have a few slides to update you on the interlocal hospitality tax efforts since the 21st Amendment was signed back in the fall of last year. And then I'll turn it over to Mary Vigue, who participated in the RFP process for the indoor sports facility, to walk you through the process and recommendation. So just a quick refresher, Wake County has had the authorization for a 6% room occupancy tax and a 1% prepared food and beverage tax since the early 90s. While we've certainly heard today there are a lot of needs in our community for schools, public safety, transportation, affordable housing, the list goes on. These funds are only to be used to support the convention center, the arena, and other cultural, sports, and arts activities in the county. The funds are governed by you and the Wake County Board, and there are a series of interlocal agreements that govern the use of funds, and the most recent being the 21st Amendment, which I'll review in a minute. I really like this chart, not so much for the numbers, but it really provides a visual of how volatile these revenues are over time. So as we make funding decisions, it's a great frame of reference for how important it is that we invest in projects that will keep the revenue stream strong in future years. I will say that the financial models are conservative as we look to the future for our investments that we make, as many of these projects are debt funded. I can say for the first 6 months of FY20, revenues are on target if meeting our budget. So real quick, as I mentioned, we concluded the 21st Amendment, which was signed by Wake County and Raleigh in August of last year. Key items were the continued support of our regional facilities, including the maintenance support for Convention Center, PNC Arena, and the various sports complexes in Cary. The amendment instructed staff to perform 2 RFP processes, one for the indoor sports facility, which was identified in the Wake County Destination Plan, and a second RFP for medium-sized projects that deliver a strong return on investment. That RFP was posted in early December of last year, and responses are due actually on Thursday. And that schedule and recommendation will be coming to you in March. So really that brings us to the first RFP process, which is for the indoor sports facility, and I'll turn it over to Mary, and she'll take forward the recommendation.
Good afternoon, and I can talk really quick, so I'll try to slow it down. In October of 2019, the city and county jointly launched a competitive process to identify a project partner associated with the indoor sports facility. Proposals were due on January 16th, and this group was made up of participants from the county, the city, and other community members. We issued the RFP, and it was based on these minimum requirements that you can see. We were looking for a minimum 150,000 square foot multi-use indoor sports complex. We wanted to make sure it was in alignment with the destination strategic plan. And what we were putting out there was to provide up to $2.3 million in annual funding for 25 years, so to really leverage future debt. We received one proposal, and that was from the town of Cary. The project proposed by Cary is anticipated to cost approximately $193 million. It will be located on the site of the Cary Town Mall, and it'll include a host of things. And so here's a list of what their proposal included: 12 full-size basketball courts, arena seating for 4,000. They did include the 25,000 multi-purpose space, esports amenities, which was also included in our RFP, team locker rooms, a full-service restaurant. They have planned for sufficient parking and parking overflow, and other amenities that would go along with an indoor sports facility. The team used a scoring tool, and team members assigned the project a score of 79 out of 100. And we are recommending that the city and county commit funding of up to that $2.36 million per year for the next 25 years. And so today, we are in front of you to ask that at the next meeting, we'll be bringing forth a recommendation that you approve that we move forward with negotiations with the town of Cary for that contract, which will be brought back to you for approval. So this is just the first step in that process. Any questions? That was very quick. Sorry.
Anybody have any questions?
I just have a question about the scoring, I guess, card matrix.
Yes, sir.
And not for right now, but it may be helpful just to see how the score was accumulated.
We can share that with you, but it was things in terms of looking at its connection to the the long-range strategic plan, how it relates to other facilities in the area or coordinate with them, making sure it met our initial requirements with the RFP. As your budget person, what is their long-range financing tool? How are they going to fund it? How are they going to pay for the operating expenses? But we can include that in an update.
And what was the score threshold for y'all to make a recommendation to approve? Like, where would it had to have fallen?
Pretty low. I mean, I would imagine anything, like if you failed a paper, I would imagine we would have gone back and looked at it, especially where they lost points weren't in necessarily areas that gave us huge amounts of concern, if that makes sense. They were some things that were still unknown. For example, there's two, they have a location specified, but there's two different spots on there. And so we just had a little bit concern about which spot it would be on, but it wasn't anything to stop the project.
Okay, I was just curious.
But we can get that to you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for this. Is there an economic impact analysis or study that's done to kind of prove the feasibility of a model or project that basically would state that our investment from this fund warrants, basically this warrants the investment?
Was there, I don't know if there was one done initially with the strategic study, but when they submitted the RFP, they did an impact analysis of what the investment would produce in terms of hotel rooms, guests in the area, and those types of things.
Okay, and then just for my own edification, do they get to choose who does their that analysis, or is that provided, or is the analysis done externally?
It is provided by them as part of their RFP, as part of their response.
Got it.
Now,
Okay.
we had the best and the brightest in a room who were shooting holes in it, if that helps
Sure.
you.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
And there was only one proposal, is that correct?
yes, sir.
And why do you think that is?
It's a
Is that
It's a
what-
very specific RFP in terms of what we're looking for and who could have that capacity or areas. I really don't want to speculate.
Yeah, I'll try to help with that a little bit. So as you, actually, Mary, could you go back to the slide that shows the 21st Amendment? So for the newer council members, this conversation has been going on for a couple of years. And so the adoption of the 21st Amendment had, as you can see on the chart, different buckets or categories of funding commitments. And so it's kind of like your capital investment plan. There are different allocations of funds that were approved for these various categories. And then the direction was to go out to an RFP process to make that request. This particular, and this was open to anybody to submit, but an indoor sports facility is a pretty significant project, and there's only going to be a few players that are in that particular space, particularly when you limit it to Wake County. And so there was no provision that one group would get it over another, but there was definitely some interest from several of the participants of the 21st Amendment. So the indoor sports facility piece was part of the destination study, which indicated that a facility for indoor sports would have a high return on investment for hospitality tax revenues. In other words, amateur sports facilities generate a lot of hotel room nights and a lot of prepared food results. And so that's why that was carved out as a specific project that the 21st Amendment recommended. So that's the context, that it's one piece of the overall amendment that was adopted.
And just so you all know, our convention center currently hosts 2 major basketball tournaments each summer, as well as some cheerleading. And these are national events, as well as a cheerleading event every summer. So this facility could complement that, as well as the possibility of allow the convention center to have even more diverse events. So they all work together.
Okay. I think we're good. Thank you. Okay.
So you'll see that coming back on your agenda for the February 18th council meeting. And if you have any additional questions that you'd like to ask for us between now and then, feel free to give us a call.
Yes, please do. If you have any questions, do some research, contact Ruffin between now and next week, okay? All right, so we're at the end of our agenda. However, have a motion for a closed session. Motion is in order to enter closed session pursuant to GS 143-3181A3 to consult with the city attorney, to preserve the attorney-client privilege, and to give instructions concerning the handling and/or settlement of a potential claim.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.